Well, let's kick off by defining what we mean by a project. And in the context of this unit, I should mention that there are a number of different project management methodologies, from the Prince2 to the Agile. There's even just-in-time project management methodologies and so forth. This unit uses the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge, it stands for. It uses that as the basis for the content and the learning outcomes. And that's really the fundamental theory and competencies behind project management, including all those variations. So if you have a good understanding of the PM body of knowledge, you'll have a good understanding of how Prince or just in time or agile, all those methodologies fall within that. So how do we define a project? A project is any one-of job that has a specific start or a specific endpoint, is executed in a systematic approach that is planned and controlled. So we have a sequential flow of events and has outcomes that are defined in these three metrics. Time, when are we going to get this project completed by? And when are the milestones within that? Quality, what does the final product look like and how does that align with the needs of our key stakeholders? And cost, what's our budget and how do we go spending against that budget? So as a manager, I've got a particular task or major event that I need to manage. I've never done this before and I have really no idea on what to do, so I can't rely on business as usual. I need to really stop and think about what is this undertaking going to consist of and what resources do I need, what time and so forth. If we put it in a more contemporary context, those lines have been are far more ambiguous in a contemporary context. So we use project management methodology now for executing components of programs, for example. So there may be a particular program that is business as usual. There's been a variation or change to it, to a component of that, and we want to handle that in a project management methodology, and we're going to bring in certain project management competencies to assist us to deal with that. So the theoretical, the origins of project management and the theoretical component of project management is that it's something that's a one-of, it's something that has a specific start and end point, it's something that's executed in a systematic approach, and it's something that is defined by those three metrics I talked of time, quality, and cost. But we can apply these, as I said, we can apply these approaches to pretty much any task that we have where it's not business as usual. So therefore, it's not a programmed activity. It's not something that someone has encompassed as part of their everyday routine, and it's part of their job description because we've done it since Adam was a boy, and we're going to do it till the end. But embedded within that description I've just given is the process, a systematic process within that. And when we talk about that within the project context, we're normally talking about phases or stages of projects, and the language changes depending on what's the culture within the workplace. So some organizations will refer to these as phases, other organizations will refer to them as stages, and sometimes you'll see a hybrid of both. However, we can think about it in terms of key components of the methodology or of the sequential process that we're going to go through. The initiating phase, and that's where I mentioned at the start of the video, this is where we have an idea and we flesh out that idea, we put a structure to it, and we start to determine what exactly is going to be involved with executing this, and who has to sign it off before we can start. Now, if we were doing a certificate for or a diploma of project management, that would be your responsibility. So as a project manager, you'd be responsible for getting the idea. So either you've got the idea or someone like your sponsor comes to you and says, I've got an idea, and you have to go and scope it out. In the context of this unit, because of the framework of this unit, our starting point is that you have been given a scope. So our starting point will be that your manager or your sponsor will come to you and say, this is something that we're going to do, which is not business as usual, and I would like you to execute it. And they may or may not say, using a project management methodology. It may be an initiative you take. However, you've got the scope given to you, so it's already there's been a determination already about what are the deliverables, what needs to come out of it, and what timelines you have, and resources availability, and so forth. And I'll talk more about that as I unpack that. So we've got the initiating phase. We tick that off. So once the sponsor signs off, or the boss signs off on what we're going to do, we tick that off. Then we get into the planning phase, and this is where we start to break down that scope, and we really start to put together detailed plans. And when I say detailed, it will depend on the nature of the project and the complexity of it, but we'll start to determine what needs to happen, what's the sequence of events that need to happen, what are the resources that we require, either people or skills or money or equipment, what's the timeline of those, and what are the risks, which we'll spend a bit of time talking about risk management. So we do the plans, we're happy with the plans, and then we execute the project. We execute the plans that we've just set up. So we starting dates occur and events start to happen as we have set up in our plan and with our schedules. And we're out there as a project manager ensuring that these things happen. So often it's about having meetings and making sure that people are clear about what's happening when, and understanding when they've got to step up to the plate in terms of executing their component of the project and so forth. And then we go into the controlling phase, and that's where we get data on our performance. We measure against where we should be and what we should be achieving. We identify where there are gaps or variants, and we take action on those. And then finally, hopefully, because the execution has gone really well and it's all gone on track, we close it up with a successful outcome. Now, that may not always be the case, and we'll talk about variations to that a bit later. That's the theoretical 5 stages or phases in a project. However, we can really condense those down. We can bring them down into a 3 phase. So if you've got a smaller project, so you're organizing a social event for your team, and you're using, because you haven't done this before, you're using a project management methodology, you may just condense it down to 3 stages or 3 phases, because it's far more adaptable and flexible to your needs, just because it's the nature of the project itself. And that might be the startup phase, the execution phase, and the wrap-up phase. So you can modify these depending on the nature of the size, the nature and size of the project, and the complexity and number of stakeholders, and the processes and protocols that are required by the organization as well. I should add that in. For this particular unit, we're going to stick pretty much with the theoretical model. We're going to stick to those 5. So I'm going to unpack those 5, and then hopefully you'll get to the end of the unit, and you'll be very familiar with those 5 and how they work, and then you'll have that flexibility to expand or condense the phases as you deem necessary for the context of what you're applying these skills with. So as a project manager, what would be our standard accountabilities? Well, we're usually accountable for developing and monitoring the work plan itself. We take what needs to be done and we set out the plan for it. And part of that plan is, as I said, identify resources. What skill mix do we need for this? And people and capabilities. What resources do we require in terms of equipment? What resources do we require in terms of money? What resources do we require in terms of time? So we break that down. We set out the sequence of events. And then we undertake a risk management approach or strategy where we think, okay, I've got my fundamental plan down, but what are some of the things that can go wrong? How seriously do I take those things from occurring? So how seriously do I take those things occurring in terms of what are the consequences and what are the likelihoods, making a determination of the level of risk, and then making a determination on the appropriate action to take or treatment. And And that's really falls in within the planning phase. And then as we go through the execution, we're dealing with those contingencies as things go off the rails or go off the plan, managing those. We're also dealing with staff issues and concerns. So as issues are raised, and it might be things like absenteeism, for example. People are away, or they're sick, or 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 that sometimes they're taken away to other projects because they have a greater priority than ours. We have to deal with those. Sometimes they're under performance issues where we're not delivering quite on our quality targets that we had hoped for, so we have to deal with those and so forth. We also need to, as a project manager, part of our accountability is making sure that we are keeping all our stakeholders well informed and well satisfied. And we'll talk more about satisfaction levels and so forth, and needs analysis when we get into the stakeholder component of this unit. But that's a key component of ours, and particularly when working in the government space, where stakeholder management is critical to especially any senior work that you do, but any level within government. This is an important part of our responsibility as a project manager, is just making sure that we're managing our stakeholders, and a big component of that is keeping them informed, consulting and informing, a lot of what we do. And part of that is addressing needs, and that can be internal or external customer needs, it can be stakeholder needs. And then another key responsibility of us as a project manager is to close off the project at the end. So once we've given the wrap up, and that may be because the project has run its course and it's due to be wrapped up, or it might be because someone senior to us has said, okay, that's enough, Tony, let's wrap this up. And we're going to cut our losses at where we are. Either of those situations, we need to wrap up the project, and there are a number of things that we need to do around that in terms of making sure that we tie up all the loose ends and disperse of resources and so forth. And we'll talk more about that when we get to that component of this unit.